is a bill to help small businesses in their first 2 years of operation. It's limited to small businesses of 10 employees or fewer. And it essentially says that if a small business misses their tax payment or gets behind on their taxes, that we, the Commonwealth, will not help contribute to that snowball effect that makes it so difficult for many businesses to survive and to thrive. And it simply says that if a small business of 10 employees or fewer within their first 2 years of business gets behind on their taxes, that we will waive the state's penalties and late fees, provided they get on a payment program with the Department of Taxation. There is no fiscal impact on this. This is, I think, something that would help small businesses avoid going under, at least as a result of these tax penalties and fees, which can sometimes be as high as 6% in some cases.
All right. Any questions from the subcommittee? Anyone here in the audience?
Mr. Chairman?
All right. Delegate Marshall.
I just want to know why we are proceeding in the dark.
It's called mood lighting, and I like it.
It's not.
Anyone in the audience wish to speak for or against the bill?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just a real quick question. How many small businesses do we think we're actually going to have cover this? Because most of the small companies like this are actually going to be an LLC or an S Corp, and I don't know. I mean, how big a net are we throwing out here? And I don't mean any harm to anything, because I like the idea of this.
So the numbers that I have, and this is 2012, 72% of Virginia small businesses were 10 or fewer employees. Now, the number of businesses that get behind on their taxes that are within that category, I don't know the answer to.
Well, and Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
just simply because if they're an S Corp or an LLC, the business is not going to get behind on its taxes. It would be the individual that gets behind on their taxes.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be included in this. And maybe next year we got to come back and look at that. But
A whole nother ballgame. We're going to start saying an individual can be late on his taxes. This wouldn't do that. But no, I understand. Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Marshall.
Is the small business defined by the number of employees or gross revenue in millions?
By this bill is defined by the number of employees,
And it is how many people?
10 or fewer.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Buddy? Delegate Buddy.
Sure. I just have one question, Senator. Does this also include like the sales taxes they withhold, or is that? If somebody have a small retailer, and they collect sales tax.
It would not, yeah.
It would not apply.
That's okay. It is the business taxes that they would pay the state.
Move to report.
Yep.
All right. There's motion and second to recommend reporting. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you,
Thank you
Senator.
very much, Mr. Chairman.
Would you give Senator Obenchain?
Chairman, members of the committee, I've got a Senate bill,
1286.
1286. And this is a relatively simple bill that waives a 2% transfer fee for conservation tax credits. Here's the situation. If S Corp, a pass-through entity, pass-through entities don't owe taxes. They don't pay taxes. The owners pay taxes. That's the nature of the entity. And the situation arose in which a S Corp owned by a former Western Virginia resident who's now a resident of another state purchased conservation tax credits to offset the withholding requirement for the out-of-state owner of the LLC. The tax credits were purchased in the name of the LLC, the pass-through entity. And when they tried to apply that to the withholding requirements, they had to pay a 2% transfer fee to transfer them to the owner of the interest, which is, it is the true party in interest. And so what this provides is that in a situation which there is a pass-through entity, and the pass-through entity purchases the tax credits for the purpose of offsetting the withholding requirement, there shall be no 2% transfer fee for the, in order to offset those tax credits. And in this case, the taxpayer did it, and granted there was some misunderstanding. I think the taxpayer had a misunderstanding. The taxpayer was told it's okay, and the LLC bought it, and then was told you've got to transfer it, transfer the tax credits, and pay this 2%. In the meantime, the bank accounts were frozen, and it was a mess. It would have all been cured were the transfer not required.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Delegate Marshall.
The 2% transfer fee, that went to the state coffers?
It did.
Another question?
Go ahead.
Was the LLC's accountant fired?
The LLC actually, in this instance, asked, and I don't remember tax on the bus, but I think they asked tax whether it was okay, or some variation of that. And it was indicated that it was okay. And moreover, why should they not? Because it is it is an entity that doesn't owe taxes anyway, and it is, the benefit party who benefits from it ought to benefit from the tax credits as well as incur the tax liability. The tax liability passes through, and so should the tax credits as well. Otherwise, the tax credits have no benefit. So this simply conforms the benefit with the liability, makes it easier for the taxpayer. So, and if I've misstated what the advice was from the tax or whatever, I apologize.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Marshall.
So by following the advice of the tax department, they ended up having to pay 2% transfer fee.
Let me just say there was some confusion.
There you go. Tax.
Okay.
Want to make any comments?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Kristen Collins from the Department of Taxation. I was not personally involved in these discussions. I've heard a little bit about what happened. I don't want to speak to what happened to a particular taxpayer, but Senator Ogunchain is correct that under the law, anytime a pass-through entity transfers one of these credits or passes them through to an owner, they are subject to the 2% transfer fee that's specifically stated in the law. Disregarded entities are not, so if it's only one owner, but in this case I believe it was more than one owner, so they were subject to the fee. This bill would essentially waive that penalty on any non-resident owners that are subject to the withholding requirement.
Are we going to be treating non-resident owners better than we're treating resident owners? Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
What I would say is no, because there's no withholding requirement for resident owners.
There's a transfer fee.
may I respond?
Yes.
Senator Ogunchain is correct. Resident owners are not subject to the withholding, but they are subject to tax in Virginia. And the non-residents that are subject to the withholding, they are required to later file their non-resident returns, and then they would claim the credit on their return. They claim the withholding that's paid, just like an employee would claim any withholding paid that's withheld by their employer on their return. The non-residents do the same thing. So this would exempt them, the non-residents who are subject to the withholding from the fee, and they would also claim it on their non-resident return. So you're correct, it would be treating non-residents differently than residents. The residents would still be subject to the transfer fee.
They'd be getting but the residents don't have withholding, is what you're,
Correct, but they would both, even under this bill, the way I read it, the non-residents, in addition to it being applied against the withholding, when they then file their non-resident return, they would still claim the credit on their non-resident return, and that also wouldn't be subject to the fee. Right now, the transfer for a non-resident owner, they're only subject to the fee one time, and this would waive that fee.
how many, can you give me an estimate as to what percentage the owners are non-resident versus residents?
The number, I don't have the exact number, but it's a pretty small percentage that are claiming the land preservation credit. We collect about $400,000 in transfer fees from all pass-through entity owners, and it's a pretty small percentage. We don't have the data broken down though.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Head and then Delegate Marshall.
if you, just to clarify too, I think if you've got a Virginia, and would like for tax to verify that I'm right on this, if you've got a Virginia resident owning that and they already hold the tax credit, they're probably gonna apply that tax credit to their Virginia taxable income and not to any withholding, because it wouldn't be withholding there to be tying it to, and since it's all passed through income, there wouldn't need to be a transfer, they're not gonna transfer it to the business, they can use it on their personal income, and you just, when they've got a non-resident, they can't do that.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to that, you're correct, they're not subject to the withholding, but they are subject to the transfer fee in order to claim it on their Virginia return, if that makes any sense. The Virginia resident, they have to pay the transfer fee in order for the credit to be transferred from the pass-through entity to the owner so they can claim it on their Virginia income tax return.
Mr. Chairman, but that's only if they purchase the credit through the entity. And if
Correct.
you're living in Virginia and are planning to use it yourself, you wouldn't pass it, I'd like, for example, I wouldn't have my business buy those tax credits, I would buy the tax credits myself and then hold on to them. And what it sounds like you've got here is that happened and then it was transferred to the corporation in order to cover the pass-through. In order to cover the withholding.
Correct, yeah, in this case, I believe that the entity purchased the credit directly and transferred it to the non-resident owner. If you had a same situation where the owner was a resident instead of a non-resident, under this bill, they would be still subject to the transfer fee. But you're correct, if you wanna go out and buy a credit on your own, then you would not, you would be subject to the fee, but you wouldn't have any withholding.
And my point, Mr. Chairman, is just that there's not a conceivable situation where a Virginia resident that owns an LLC or an S corp is ever gonna do that. So I don't see a difference.
Delegate Marshall.
Mr. Chairman, for the tax lady, well, I don't know her name, so she's a tax lady to me. This is prospective, or is there a provision of the code that allows these poor saps who had to pay the 2% to get the money?
No,
Oh, okay.
they're not seeking it.
All right. Any other questions? We're not providing some kind of reverse incentive here for people that create a situation where they go out of state for,
Nobody's gonna intentionally do this.
I can't imagine.
No, I mean, they think it's a pass-through entity, and they think that it's gonna apply to offset the withholding. And this is just simply to reduce the possibility of confusion, misunderstanding, and taxpayer getting socked with a 2% just because they bought it in the name of the pass-through entity instead of the name of the individual owner.
Okay. All right. Anyone in the audience wish to speak for or against the bill? All right. Motion second, recommend reporting. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you, Senator. All right. Next was Senator DeStefano.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Which would you prefer to start with?
Let's start with 1165. It's probably, they're both pretty easy, and they both came from the Joint Subcommittee on Tax Preferences over the summer. 1165 is pretty simple, and really what it does is it allows, when you're looking at MAP credits, it allows you to look at the past performance. So if somebody's had a bad past performance, then we can use that when determining future tax credits for that organization. If you remember from the Joint Subcommittee this summer, we had one or two folks who we kept giving neighborhood tax credits to, and they weren't using them as intended. So this allows us to actually use past performance and make sure that doesn't happen in the future.
All right, Senator, we considered a bill, Delegate Orrock's bill, would have set aside half for underserved areas. But I'm trying to remember, did Orrock have this language in his? It didn't, did it? Council?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Orrock's bill did have similar language regarding taking into account past performance and providing for using performance metrics in terms of allocation of credits under the program. But you're absolutely right that it did provide some additional measures like the set aside of one half of the allocation for underperforming school districts. So,
Are you aware of that?
I was not aware of Delegate Warnock's bill at all, so
Well,
haven't seen it, haven't read it yet.
Are you, the bill, I'm trying to remember, Warnock passed 95 to nothing out of the House. Would you be okay if we conformed it to that and then you guys talk?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to read it first and make sure it doesn't change the intent of this.
Are you take by temporarily? And then read
Yeah,
it?
that's fine with me. Give me a few minutes and I'll read it,
Yep.
and then
We'll
we'll come back.
All right. All right, Senator Carrico,
I've got one more.
you got one more. Go ahead and
Take
take
that.
one more and then we'll.
Senate Bill 1168 on the neighborhood tax credits. And what this does is, there's been a little bit of confusion with the difference between the Department of Education and the Department of Social Services. So what we did was, the two sections of the code are very similar, but we put them together, we've separated them, so if you're applying on Department of Education, it's very clear how you need to apply, what you need to do, and how you qualify. On the other hand, if you apply under Department of Social Services, it's very clear of how you can apply, what you need to do, and how you need to get through it. So really, and this was another thing from the joint subcommittee, really helps clarify both sides of the program so people aren't mixing up when they apply. So, and there's no substantive change to the existing program from any of this. It's really a cleanup bill that organizes it and makes it easier to understand for those applying.
All right. Questions for the patron?
Sir?
Council, have you reviewed it? And tax, have you reviewed it? You're comfortable with it? Okay. A lot of verbiage.
Like I said, this is a cleanup bill that simplifies it when you're applying for the program.
All right. Any questions for the patron?
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Day.
Delegate Farrell had his bill that addressed the 10% available tax credits each year to qualifying programs and rolling forward, and and this does not make that same change, or does it?
it doesn't.
So you might want to look at conforming that, because I believe Delegate Farrell's bill also came flying out of here, and
Since they're two completely separate bills, I think we can just let both bills go ahead.
okay.
If his catches a fever over in the Senate, we can always amend the bill and do whatever needs to be done to catch up, but for now, I think we can keep them separate. All right. Can I get a motion on the bill? All right, motion second, to recommend report in 1168. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. Can you give me the number for Delegate Works bill?
1838.
Thank you very much.
Senator Carrico.
Senate Bill 1328. This is dealing with the, an enterprise zone tax credits. It basically doesn't do anything to expand them. It operates within the tax credits as currently written. It just gives the business owners the ability and qualifies them in zones where they spend money on mechanical structures, electrical, demolition if necessary, and any type of expansion or rehabilitation of buildings in areas where the enterprise zones are targeted. You have older buildings and so forth. They may want to rehabilitate those buildings and use them for enterprise locations, and this just expands the ability to give that tax credit for that.
All right, so right now, the real property qualifies, or the expenditure qualifies for a grant or tax credit
Retail Merchants Association, and I have here with me Michael Plotkin, who's a Virginian member of our association, and he represents the International Council of Shopping Centers. And we had a member from Southwest Virginia bring to our attention that there was a change in the requirements for IRS reporting that conflicted with the way that they apply for this grant in Virginia. It conflicted with Virginia's code language. And all we're doing is trying to fix that so that the same pool of people that have had the ability to apply for this grant will continue to have the ability to apply for the grant. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you set? Are you, do you want to add to that, or are you good? All right. And, does look like as a potentially unknown, but,
It's not expanding.
not expanding the, okay. All right, any discussion from the subcommittee? Thornton.
Move to report.
Motion second, recommend reporting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? One no. All right, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Stanley.
Good, here you go. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Committee.
1427. This is identical to the pre-K scholarship tax credit that we passed out of this subcommittee and then was tabled in the full committee. So I think it's identical. It doesn't even need to be conformed.
No, it's identical in the sense that, and I believe that it was amended later by perhaps people out of Virginia Beach, and that's what may have been part of the cause for the tabling, but this was the original form as we had intended it to be.
Well, and I think, well, anyone here, yeah, it is. It's Massey's bill, and I think we just need to treat it the same way we treated Massey's bill. Anyone here wishing to speak for or against the bill? You're for it? Yeah. You're for it? Yeah. All right. For it? You're for it? Yeah. All right. Well, I think the full committee wants to discuss it, so if I can get it, yeah, I got a motion to report. Is there a second? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. There are some no's. So, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Trying to be a full committee.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, Senator Edwards.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 9 and 12 is a recommendation of the Code Commission. What this does is, Virginia is a conforming state when it comes to income taxes. We conform to the federal system, how they do things. Then, in addition to that, let me just walk you through it. First of all, we get your federal adjusted income, gross income. And from that, you add Virginia additions. And then you take away from that Virginia subtractions. And then you take away from that Virginia deductions. And then you adjust it based on, let's call it other modifications, 4 separate categories. Currently, all these 4 categories are in one long section. It's complicated. What this does is break it into 4 discrete sections so that you have one section dealing with additions, Virginia additions, another section dealing with Virginia subtractions, another section Virginia deductions, and another section with the quote other modifications. I can walk you through it. It's you look at page involved bill here, page 11, line 630. There's a discrete section called Virginia taxable income additions, and then on line 655, Virginia taxable income subtractions. And then if you move over to line, on page 14, line 797, deduction, Virginia taxable income deductions, and then on page 15, another section dealing with Virginia taxable income additional modifications. So that's what it does. It makes no substantive changes in the law. There's no change in the forms that Virginia citizens have to fill out. And it does delete some obsolete provisions and make some technical changes in the law.
Mr. Chairman?
That's basically what it does.
Delegate Marshall.
Senator, on page 7, this strikes language, talks about victims of Nazi persecution or the Swiss Confederation both before, during, and after World War II. Why are we getting into that? It's lines 400 to 409.
Have an expert here.
It puts it back in. All this bill is doing is taking one really long code section and turning it into 4 shorter code sections. I think the code commission wanted this bill, basically anytime you would amend section 322, you got a 30-page bill. This way you can amend just the addition section, just the subtractions, just the deductions. The intent is not to change or take anything away, it just breaks one long code section into 4 shorter code sections.
I didn't see it was inserted later, so.
You guys have reviewed it and are comfortable with all?
Chairman, we reviewed it, we don't see where it makes any substantive change to law. We're gonna have to change their forms and instructions where we cite things, but other than that, it's no big deal.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion? Can I get a motion on the bill? Second. Motion second. President reporting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Senator DeStefano, did you have time to review Senator Delegate Carrico's? Delegate Orozco.
Actually, I did, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 1838, we're looking at 2 different issues. Mine actually hits both sides of the neighborhood assistance program, the education and the social services side. Delegate Orix only focuses on the education side.
You're correct.
On mine, we focus on past performance of the organization on both of these for future awards. His looks at getting community input, teachers' input on just the education side, and then goes into changing how much of, looking at half of it for underperforming schools, et cetera, et cetera. So really, it's 2 different separate things. Mine's covering both sides of the code for past performance. His is focused only on the education and primarily with the underperforming schools, was saying half of it has to be used there. So really, mine hits the whole code, his hits just one section of it. So they really are 2 different bills, and with that, I hope you pass both bills.
Mr.
We
Chairman?
can have tax chime in as well.
Looking at the language in your bill, which is in a different form, I'm just wondering if there's any conflict or if they're going to be complementary if they end up passing. Both end up passing. Go ahead, Chris.
Mr. Chairman, Krista Collins from the Department of Taxation again. The language is in the same subsection, but I think it's complementary. Legislative services can weigh in if they disagree, but I think you could do both together. I think Senator DeStefano summed it up pretty well. It kind of is addressing 2 similar but slightly different issues. One is forward-looking and the other one's looking back, and like he said, one only affects the education piece versus his affects all proposals and how they performed in the past.
Okay. Well, Delegate Warrock is at a doctor's appointment, so he'll probably review it as it goes up to full committee, and he'll probably talk to you about it if he wants to do anything other than move the bill along. But Patrion's fine with that.
Absolutely fine with that,
The
Mr.
language
Chairman.
is complementary. So, can I get a motion on the bill? Motion second, recommend reporting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, last bill we
Chairman,
have.
members of the committee, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Donovan said she was unable to be here. 10:25. I told her if it had any problem, that we would go ahead and postpone it and bring her in. But Council, can you go ahead and summarize 10:25 for us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So this bill only applies to the payment of taxes by certain public service corporations, and what that means for this chapter of the code is it only applies to water utilities. And we've since in the code moved it so that electric utilities don't pay their taxes on an estimated basis. Water utilities are the only types of utilities that still pay on an estimated basis in this way. And so what this would do is it would make it so that water utilities just pay taxes, at the time that they're due, rather than estimating them and paying them upfront. So there would be a deferral in fiscal year 2019 to 2020 of 1.2 million in revenues, but it wouldn't make any changes to the actual revenue intake of the Commonwealth.
All right, so we're just catching the water taxes up to the rest of the utilities. And it doesn't affect the budget because it's out in an out year, in 19. So, is there any discussion from subcommittee or questions for council? Tax, are you,
I'm talking with the State Corporation Commission. I'm here to answer any questions if you have any regarding the bill.
great.
Mr.
Thank you
Chairman?
for being here. Delegate Marshall.
So this is a when bill, not a what bill? When the taxes are paid, not what taxes?
Yes, sir. The same amount of taxes will be paid. It's just a matter, instead of paying them in 4 equal installments over the tax year, they will pay them at one time on June 1st of each year when all the other water companies pay. We have about 66 water companies that we assess, and they're all subject to the license tax in lieu of a corporate income tax. Of those 66 companies, if you have a tax liability greater than $5,000, then you're required to pay estimated taxes, and we only have about 20 of the 66 companies that pay that estimated tax. So basically what it does is it puts them on the same playing field with the companies that have tax liability of less than $5,000, and they'll all pay the taxes at one time of the year, which is June 1st of each year.
All right, any further questions? Let's roll a subcommittee. All right, motion second, recommend reporting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that's recommended for reporting. I think that's it. I think that's our only subcommittee meeting, guys. So we'll see you at full. Thank you guys very much.
Hopefully that's okay that I said you can do both of them because I'm not the one doing it. I mean, y'all are.
Oh, no, we already have it regs. Regs, so we can make it